Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dalaran, and I've been really enjoying hanging out in patch 9.1. The seasonal affix that players are still trying out, still experimenting with, gave me an opportunity to test out a variety of different builds. And one of the biggest things that came out for patch 9.1 was the class Covenant legendaries. These legendaries are for the Covenant to improve, or at least try to alter the Covenant ability in some way, major or minor. And I decided to put together some of the more fun builds for the Kyrian Covenant in this video. Some of these builds could potentially be really strong, but the one thing we always focus in this kind of series is the fun builds. Which ones are enjoyable, or do they add extra mechanics that could have some kind of a cool, interesting payoff in the future? So let's take a look at some of the Kyrian options you might be able to play with that I personally found pretty enjoyable. Normally you want to save the best for last, but I was genuinely excited to show you guys the Warrior Kyrian legendary. After playing with this setup for as arms and fury for a bit, and after seeing so many numerous warriors testing out this legendary, warriors with much better gear and with a lot better soulbind setup than I have, I've really been able to see just how strong this combo could potentially be. The Warrior Kyrian legendary extends the duration of your Spear of Bastion by a little bit, but also provides you a buff while you stand in the spear, granting you 25% more damage to your crits. So as long as you're critting a lot, which could be possible in the future with a crit heavy build, or if you play Fury Warrior for example, you'll naturally gain more crit every time you hit Recklessness, you could have a very strong build on your hands. And I've been seeing Fury Warriors, but mostly Arms Warriors just dominating inside of Mythic Pluses with this much raw damage. There was a little bit of concern at first, especially in the Warrior Discord, in terms of just how good this legendary is going to be, because to really min-max the value of the 1 minute cooldown of your spear, you will have to kind of offset UCDs a little bit to help the spear do more damage, because as arms you have a 45-second CD on your Colossus Smash, or Warbreaker if you're talented, 1.5 minute CD on your Blade Storm, and then the Spear of Bastion is at 1 minute, which means all of those CDs are pretty much distinct from one another. To solve this issue primarily for AoE situations and Mythic Pluses, you play the Mechanica Soulbind with a brand new trait added for patch 9.1, which allows your spear to blast enemies for a little bit extra more arcane damage, and for every enemy hit up until a certain point, you will have some cooldown reduction element to it. That means you could reduce the cooldown of your spear down to about 40 seconds, which lines up with Warbreaker exceptionally well. Combined together with a massive execute damage and some of the PvE buffs warriors have gotten in patch 9.1, it actually looks fantastic, and the numbers behind it on much geared warriors are looking absolutely unreal. I don't know how good this one will be in terms of the final build, in terms of the tuning, but so far in PTR, it not only has been dominant in terms of the damage, but also has been very, very fun and a different playstyle than what we see from the Venthyr as well as the Night Fae. The Shaman legendary is a little interesting. It might be really difficult to pull off as maybe enhancement because of mana issues. Yes, mana issues. But if you can pull it off, I feel like this one has potential. So before we go into the legendary, I have to explain the Vesper Totem, which is the Kyrian Covenant ability for Shamans. Most of you guys won't know what this ability is. You drop down a totem and your next 3 damaging abilities expand a damage charge from the totem, allowing the totem to pulsate with damage. The totem also has 3 healing charges, so your next 3 healing abilities after dropping down the totem will also allow it to pulsate with heals. It has 3 damage charges and 3 healing charges. The legendary states once all those charges have been used up, the totem will erupt in a final massive charge to every enemy around it, which does mean uncapped AoE. This damage is actually quite significant, and I know Shamans already have very, very strong legendaries, so it's going to be very difficult to be competitive against what's already the bread and butter of Shaman and just how powerful all these setups already are for them. But I do like to dream that this legendary could potentially be good maybe in huge big pull AoE situations or something along the sorts. It's one that's a little difficult to execute now because there's not a lot of abilities that are very low on mana, at least for enhancement, in order to execute this ability off. But in a way, you could actually have an easier build with it. I tried to pair this with Mechanicus for the short CD, or you could just go any other Soulbind and drop the totem down, expand the 3 healing charges, then as the tank runs into the group, drop the totem in like a grenade, go through 3 damaging abilities, bam, you have the extra damage on top of it. So it might become maybe more consistent. Definitely something fun to rack my head around how to really make it work, but I did love the big explosive numbers behind it. Next one is going to be Priest. The Priest Covenant ability is Boon of the Ascended, which is kind of like a big Ascendance form for Priest. It gives you slight different alterations of the main abilities you use, but at a slightly better case, and the more of those abilities you use, the harder you'll do a massive AoE blast of damage and healing at the very end. And the Covenant Legendary seems to, the more gameplay you use, the more you use these abilities, the shorter the cooldown of this ability is going to be, potentially turning this 3-minute cooldown into a 2-minute cooldown. You guys already know that I'm a huge fan of the idea of taking 2-minute cooldowns or 3-minute cooldowns and shortening them in order to be able to use more of them. Powerful cooldowns that have a lot of weight behind them, getting more use generally can mean more damage or more healing output. While not really a popular covenant, unlike the Venthyr for Priest or the Night Fae for Priest, I feel like this is a very powerful covenant ability. It's a 3-minute cooldown which you don't really get to use that often, so a priest needs to use this ability very sparingly. But making it down to a 2-minute TD, it lines up so well with your power infusion, which gives you a massive haste buff, and when you combine together, usually with all that extra haste, you're able to go through your full Boon of the Ascended and allow your legendary, at least in AoE situations, to actually get this ability down to about a 2-minute CD. It's interesting to see what kind of builds you might be able to come up with. Like, imagine like a big nuke Shadow Priest build in the future, or maybe Discipline Priest that just go full God mode every 2 minutes. I think this definitely has some potential because this ability is kind of like in a way, a priest metamorphosis, if you will. It does slight alterations to a few of your key abilities, and it does provide you a very powerful cooldown, whether it is to mend the wounds of your allies or to damage your foes. Then we have the Warlock, primarily Destruction as the Kyrian build. Destro Kyrian Warlocks or Kyrian Warlocks in general are not super popular because, well, the ability isn't as good as the Night Fae, but with this legendary, particularly Destruction Warlock might be pretty strong. The Destruction, or I guess Warlock Covenant ability for Kyrian is Scouring Tithe. It's just a damage over time ability. If the ability does not kill the target by the time it ticks out, you actually refresh the cooldown of it and you're able to cast it on the enemy again. So this ability is kind of like a perma dot as long as the enemy does not die. However, if the enemy falls while they're dotted up, they will grant you soul shards, all 5 of them. With this legendary, every time it grants you those soul shards when the enemy dies, it'll now also grant you massive movement speed and quite a bit of critical strike. The reason I want to pair this together with Destruction is because Destruction can have the cake and eat it too. Scouring Tithe as an ability can grant you resources, but also you can have its cooldown completely reset because of Mythic Pluses and because of Havoc. Havoc is a way for Destruction Warlocks to be able to put up damage on enemies and duplicate that damage. So together with Havoc, you're able to put up 2 Scouring Tithes on enemies. In Mythic Pluses, this could be good, and maybe in some raids, it is going to be very difficult to set up, but I think there's potential. For example, let's say there's some sort of a mob that comes out during a boss fight, or maybe there are certain mobs in a trash bag for Mythic Pluses that are weaker than others, that have less health, and generally die pretty quickly. Putting up Scouring Tithe on the big mob with a big health bar and a small mob with a tiny health bar means that the mob with the tiny health bar will die, which will give you the resources you need, which will give you the legendary prog that you need, and because you have another Tithe on an enemy that's going to tick out before the enemy dies, you'll still be able to refund the cooldown of this ability, still granting you more uses of this ability. It's a very interesting setup that's really been difficult to execute, but when it does, you're just fueled of soul shards and you're just able to make rain fire on your foes. And it's actually been super fun to try to set it up. It's, again, very niche build, but it's been a lot of fun, and I wonder if maybe Destruction Warlocks in the future, together maybe with some of the soul binds that Kyrians are going to be playing with as well, you might be able to make some sort of a build out of it at some point or another. But those were the 4 builds that I've been having quite a bit of fun over in PTR for the Kyrian. Definitely got to make a video for the Night Fae, but if you guys feel like I missed a build for Kyrian, maybe I should try something else, then let me know in the comments below, or you guys can just directly head over to our Discord, also linked down below. I'm basically always online, either working on a video or playing some WoW, but I always take messages from you guys whenever you guys have any questions, concerns, or suggestions, so I'd like to hear what you guys think as well, so that'll be probably the fastest and the easiest way to reach me. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching, I do hope you guys enjoyed, and as always, I'll see all of you in another video.